It's early spring, it's a nice sunny day, and you're driving by a perfect looking pond. Are you ready to fish it? We're going to talk about being ready all the time on this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast. I'm Chad LaChance, and you're listening to Fishful Thinker, the podcast. All things fishful, all the time. Hey guys, Chad LaChance here. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast. I appreciate you tuning in very much. I also want to thank the fine folks at Sportsman's Warehouse. Of course, they're the reasons that we have a television show and a podcast and other things as well. Visit them at 145 stores nationwide or at sportsmans.com. We visit there early and often. I kind of lied in the intro there, guys, because it is early spring. But it's not a nice sunny day. We got heavy snow today at my house, and I'm okay with that because I know it's filling up the reservoirs. It's going to get things really good, and I need some time in the shop anyway. So I was just working on stuff in the shop, and it occurred to me that maybe it would make a reasonable podcast. And I want to point out for you, those of you that listen, I threw out asking for feedback on my last podcast. I'm going to do it again here. I would love to have you send me some feedback, chat at fishfulthinker.com, or post it on one of the various private messages at Fishful Thinker, of course. But the reason being is we want to make this podcast better. I want to make it what you want to hear, and so let us know there. But one of the things that occurred to me, or that was brought in there, was the fact that I do these off the cuff. And I do that on purpose because, yeah, I could do a bunch of canned content and get a bunch of people in here, but I just don't want to do that. I want to talk about what's inspiring me right now and what's relevant, or maybe recent problems that have come up from other anglers that have mentioned to me that they're, something they're trying to learn or something like that, or whatever the case might be. Well, in this particular case, I was in the shop this morning, in my shop in La Cueva del Fishful, and working on my new truck tackle for the year. And what do I mean by truck tackle? Well, I drive around in a Toyota Tundra and have for the last 20 years, and over 20 years, and it's always got fishing tackle in it at some level, some degree. And every year I revamp what I carry in the truck with me so that I'm ready to fish wherever I go fishing. And I've done other podcasts about this a couple of years ago, but it changes year to year, and it depends on where you're at. And I figured, hey, let's readdress that situation, because I'm making some changes to what I'm carrying in the truck this year as well. So when I carry stuff in the truck, it's so that I can stop and fish wherever I happen to be on a moment's notice. And I am a huge fan of just that. I'm a huge fan of opportunity fishing. Spending 5 minutes out of your day, wherever you happen to be, making a few casts. Maybe you're even in your work clothes. Maybe you're just happen to be, headed somewhere, whatever the case might be. We don't need to get into all that. But basically, long story short, being prepared to fish on a whim and taking advantage of a very short opportunity to do so. And at least in my neck of the woods, I'm never very far from some sort of body of water, whether it be a pond, a reservoir, or a river or a creek. Being where I live in northern Colorado, we have a lot of options as far as that goes. And maybe you do and maybe you don't. But the more options you have, maybe the more tackle you need to carry to cover those, depending on the diversity of those options. So I wanted to talk about what I carry, because most of the time I'm prepared to at least be in the ballpark, and I don't carry a lot of stuff. So what I'm going to talk about for this year, what I've changed for this year is historically, and when I've done my previous podcast, I carried one spinning rod in the car all the time. And that spinning rod and that little Plano 3700 box goes with me everywhere, and I'm prepared to fish. Well, this year I decided I'm going to up that a notch, because carrying two rods is not really any harder than carrying one rod based on the tube that I use, that I carry them in the truck. So I'm going to carry two rods, and that's going to make me more diverse, I feel like, as an angler. So that's what I'm doing, and we'll see how that pans out with me this year. But at the end of the day, what's my second rod? Well, my second rod is going to be a fly rod. And somebody's going to say, so now you're carrying a spinning rod and a fly rod, fundamentally different things. What's the point? The point is, I believe that the most fun fishing is had when you have the perfect tool for the job. And so when I was thinking about this, of what I was going to put in my truck for the year, because to be honest with you, I don't carry it in the wintertime. I don't ice fish. Typically, you need more clothes available to you to be able to get out of the truck for a few minutes. So I don't really carry any fishing tackle in the truck in the wintertime. I live in Colorado and it snows. But in the summer, from spring through fall, it's in there all the time. And every year I reevaluate what I'm going to carry. And I just mentioned I like to have the right tool for the job. And I could be choosing spinning tackle, casting tackle, or fly tackle. And I've decided I'm carrying the spinning rod and the fly rod this year. And the single biggest reason that motivated me to do that was all spring I've been walking banks and fishing trout. For the last, say, 4 weeks, I've been doing a bunch of that. And each day, as I'm doing that, I'm getting a little window where the trout are feeding like crazy, and the fly rod is really the better tool for the job. And several days I've been caught without the fly rod because I didn't carry it down there. Well, for basically the last week and a half or so, I've been carrying both, and I'm having more fun. When the breeze comes up, I set the spinning rod down, or the fly rod down, excuse me. And when the breeze lays down or the fish start feeding up, then I pick the fly rod up. But either way, I have more fun with it. So this year, I'm going to leave a fly rod in my truck. So the rest of this podcast, I'm going to detail basically what tackle I carry and why I carry them. And I want to point out that I carry a very minimalist approach. This is not tackle so that I can fish any scenario I run into. This is tackle so that I'm at least in the ballpark and I can make some casts, and maybe it'll pan out and maybe it won't. I guarantee I'm not always going to have the exact right bait or whatever for the job, and that's not the point. The point is to keep it simple, have it available, and take advantage of fishing just a little bit when you can. So from my standpoint, with some quick background, I could be fishing for smaller largemouth bass in a reservoir or a lake. I could be fishing for walleyes in a reservoir or smaller lake. I could be fishing for trout in any scenario, basically, because I do live in Colorado, and so it could be creeks, rivers, whatever. Any sort of reservoir, which is what I've been doing all spring, is the reservoir fishing. I could also encounter crappies or bluegills, less commonly, but they are available to me in terms of my daily driving, my routes where I go or anywhere that I might be going. I could stop at quite a few different ponds along the way, and I could fish for panfish if the conditions suited that. So those are basically the fish that I'm dealing with. And I could be fishing anything from a gravel quarry pond to, like I said, a full-blown reservoir, like my home lake here, Horsetooth Reservoir. It was a couple thousand acres, to a creek I can jump across, to the Poudre River that I can't make a cast all the way across in some areas with a spinning rod. So I have a mix of stuff available. Excuse me. And so the goal with the fishing tackle is to be able to cover as many of those bases as I can without carrying a whole bunch of stuff in the truck. So now that we know what I'm fishing for, let's talk about what I'm carrying. Now, my spinning rod is easy. I'll go quick with that one. I carry a 6.5 foot medium power 2-piece Abu Garcia Veritas spinning rod. And that allows me to target anything from bass and walleyes on the heavy end to panfish on the light end, or trout along the light end. So that medium power will happily throw somewhere between, say, 1/8 and 5/8 of an ounce. That'll get me in the ballpark of just about whatever it is I want to throw. Now, it's 2-piece, so it fits in the truck. As if you're a fan, you know I'm a huge believer in 1-piece rods. They have the best performance you can get, but they're also harder to carry. And so I carry a 2-piece rod in the truck, and that's important. Well, then what I figured out is in the tube that I carry that rod, I can also fit a fly rod, and that fly rod can be taken apart into 4 pieces. So without having any more space in the truck, I can carry the fly rod and the spinning rod. The only thing I have to add to my arsenal is a small selection of flies, and we'll get into that here in a minute. So that spinning rod has a size 2500 Revo SX on it, and which is a good workmanlike spinning reel. Not too expensive, not inexpensive, I like to fish with pretty solid tackle, pretty good tackle, and so I'm not going to put really cheap stuff in my truck, but SX hits the right line between balance of value and performance. And so that's why the Veritas and the SX combo will go together in there. Now, the line on there is very easy for me. That's going to be 15-pound X9 braid. And that X9 braid, again, will cover a huge range of bases. I could literally throw for pike if I needed to, all the way down to panfish with that. The line is very supple. It ties knots very well. It just casts well. It handles well. It's just a great all-around line. It's been my favorite line for about the last probably 5 years now, and my favorite braided line anyway, and I use tons of it. But for my one rod that's in the truck, my one spinning rod, it's got 15-pound on it. Now, how I make that the most versatile is I carry 3 spools of leader material with me all the time. And that allows me to fine-tune the business end of my line. So 15-pound braid might be a bit much for panfish, right? Somebody's going to correctly point that out, and you're 100% correct. It's heavier than I need for panfish or maybe small trout. But the flip side of it is it's on the light end for maybe a bass pond where I've got a bunch of vegetation that my fish might get in or that I might have to fish around, and therefore I need the extra tensile strength. So 15 is a good mix. I have in the past carried 10, and there's been more times I feel undergunned than overgunned. So I put 15-pound on that Revo reel, and that's what's on there. Now, to make it versatile, I carry 3 spools of leader material all the time. And I carry the small leader wheels that Berkley produces, and I carry them in monofilament, not fluorocarbon. And the reason is monofilament is more versatile, because if the lure floats and I need it to float, the monofilament won't mess that up. Whereas fluorocarbon will pull the nose under of certain lures or make small lures heavier, and also it is stiffer. So I carry my leaders in my truck in pure nylon monofilament because I can do anything with it. Whereas fluorocarbon gets the bulk of the work in my boat. It is less versatile, but I carry a lot more fishing tackle, obviously, in a 21-foot Ranger boat than I do in my Tundra. So I carry very little. So I bring the 3 spools, and they are 6-pound, 10-pound, and 14-pound. And the reason is if I'm tying something like a panfish jig or a little tiny, surface popper, something like that, I'll go on the light end, the 6-pound. If I'm all the way up to some sort of a bass bait, then I will have that all the way up on the 14-pound. And that allows me, again, to fine-tune to fit my lure. That gives me a little bit of abrasion resistance. It gives me a little bit of stiffness at the end of the line. It gives me a little bit of invisibility, so the braid's not right there. And again, it fine-tunes the line to the size of the lure that I'm fishing to get the most amount of action out of the line. Now, there's some lures where I'll just tie direct to that braid. Those lures do not have treble hooks, and those are scenarios where I'm not worried about abrasion resistance or visibility at all. And that would typically be around aquatic vegetation, like in a bass pond, soft aquatic vegetation, like Alodia grass or something like that, not rigid stuff like flooded brush. In fact, the more abrasion I'm going to deal with, like brush or rock, the more inclined I am to have the leader. So that's what it's all about, is the abrasion resistance. So by having those 3 sizes, I can tie a 16th-ounce panfish jig, or I can tie a half-ounce bass jig. So that's what I do with that. And then from there, that single Plano 3700 box. So I carry 16th-ounce, 1/8-ounce, 1/4-ounce, and 1/2-ounce jig heads. I carry 3 of each, and they are pure silver. They are not they're natural lead. They're not painted, is what I should say. And the reason I only carry 3, somebody say, well, that's not very many. Well, keep in mind, I'm not preparing for a day of fishing. I'm prepared for 20 minutes of fishing. And the only reason I'm carrying 3 is I could snag and lose one pretty easy, or I could break a hook trying to get it out of a fish, whatever the case might be. So I carry 3 of them so that I can fish for a little bit of time if I need to, but that's it. And I can always replenish that box at home. And again, all this fits in one box. So the next thing I carry 1 Berkley hit stick. It is a number 9, And then I also carry a Stunna 112, so I have a floating and a suspending jerkbait. That's what, and I carry one of each. I don't carry multiple colors. I carry one natural color of each one because I can fish a natural color in any scenario. It might not show up quite as well as I'd like in muddy water, but it's not going to pop too much in clear water. So that's what I carry. I carry both of those in very natural colors, very natural bait fish colors, and those two jerk baits go with me all the time. Another thing that's also in that box all the time is a 1/2 ounce Berkley War Pig, which is a lipless crankbait. Again, a very versatile bait. I can throw it if the wind's howling, I can throw it a long ways. I can retrieve it back fast or slow. I can yo-yo it. It's a very versatile multi-species bait. And everything that I'm going to name right here is very much multi-species, or it would not be in this box. Another thing that I carry all the time is a popper. I carry a size 70 Berkley bullet pop, and that bullet pop, again, equal smallmouth, largemouth, white bass, wipers, potentially pike if I'm around a few pike. So again, very versatile and super fun to fish. And oh, by the way, it's a heavily underrated trout bait, particularly in running water. Trout love a popper in the river, and nobody throws it, so you don't have to worry about fishing behind other guys. So fantastic bait there. Along with those jig heads, I carry some spinner arms in a couple sizes, little tiny ones all the way up to bigger sizes. A bunch of companies make those. You guys are probably familiar with Beetle Spins. That's probably the company that made them famous, but there's a bunch of different companies that make the spinner arms separately. Again, you can get those at Sportsman's Warehouse as well. And you can buy just the spinner arm, and then you put whatever size jig head you need on it and whatever size plastic you need on your jig head. Now, speaking of plastics, actually let me back up. Those spinner arms allow me to have the versatility that the jig head doesn't give me. So any even reasonable bass angler owns a bunch of traditional spinner baits. Well, I don't want to carry that much stuff. Besides that, a spinnerbait doesn't fit in a normal plain old box like all the rest of my stuff does. It's a specialty bait. But these spinner arms do. And so if I have a spinner arm and I put a jig head on it, now I effectively have a single blade spinnerbait. And it may not be quite as weedless and quite as bite gathering in some ways because it's not so bulky. But also let me point out that it's much more versatile because it's very easy to get walleyes to bite on a spinner arm rig, but difficult to get them to bite a traditional spinnerbait. Same thing with trout. A spinner arm with a jig head and a small, very small soft swim bait on it is deadly for trout. Let me just tell you that right now. A 2-inch Berkley Power Swimmer on a little tiny spinner arm is a deadly trout combination. So I carry a couple of spinner arms, 3 sizes of spinner arms. And I can use any in combination with any of my jig heads. Then I carry straight power minnows. I carry 3-inch power minnows. And somebody's going to say, oh my gosh, no gulp minnow. No, because I want to be able to put everything in this box. So I'll carry 3 or 4 natural colored power minnows in the box. I will carry 3 or 4 2.5 and 3.5-inch power tubes also in the box because tube jigs are extremely versatile. And then I'll carry 2-inch, 3.3, and I think it's 4.6-inch off the top of my head, power swimmers, Berkley power swimmers. So basically I've got a bait I can retrieve horizontally. In the power swimmer, I've got a tube jig, which I can do almost anything with, and I've also got a straight minnow body, which again I can do almost anything with, only it does it quicker. So those are the soft plastics that I carry. And somebody's going to say, oh, well, no big worms? Yes, of course. I've got to have a 7-inch Berkley power worm because we're talking about bass fishing here. Power worm, a Texas rig, a traditional Texas rig of some sort, is fantastic with a heavier rod. But because I only have this medium power spinning rod with me, then I take that power worm, I bring only 3-aught Fusion 19 hooks, and I can throw it weightless or I can throw it with a split shot ahead of it. And I don't carry a bunch of bullet sinkers and stuff like that. I carry a selection of split shot, and I can add more or less of them depending on how much weight I need. So there's probably 30 total split shots in one compartment of that box. And those split shots could be anywhere from little tiny ones all the way up to probably better part of at least an 1/8 ounce each. And again, I can layer them together, however many of them I need, to make the amount of weight that I need. So that extra wide gap Fusion 19 worm hook and the 7-inch power worm, half the time if I'm throwing that on the spinning rod, it's got no weight on it. And I'm throwing it up around vegetation, things like that. Just let it sink on the weight of the hook. And you'd be surprised how many bites you can get doing that. But if I need to, I'll put a split shot ahead of it, and then I can fish it that way as well. Incidentally, I can do the same thing with just about any of the other, like I can put the other baits on there as well. Particularly the 3.5-inch power tube will go right on that hook as well. So I have options as far as that goes. But that's basically what I'm carrying. I don't carry a lot of stuff in that box because between one of those jigs and potentially combined with one of those spinner arms, I can do whatever I need there. I've got a couple of hard baits. I didn't mention, from one I forgot, the hard baits, I didn't mention that I carry a number 7 flicker shad and a number 5 flicker shad, 2 of those, because in my opinion, they're a very versatile crankbait, and again, multi-species. And everything I'm talking about is multi-species. Probably the least multi-species thing I mentioned is that 7-inch power worm, but it happens that largemouth bass are one of my favorites, so I want to be able to address them if I run by a pond somewhere that's got them. And a worm is very hard to beat, and a 7-inch power worm specifically is probably the number 1 bite-getting worm of all time. So it's a good thing to have. But at any rate, that's basically what I carry. And I also carry a pair of pliers with good side cutters. I carry that standard 7-inch Berkeley aluminum plier with the side cutters that will cut braid or fluorocarbon. And I, of course, always have 2 pairs of Costas in my truck all the time. And when I say I always have 2 pairs, there's probably 2 pairs in the truck all the time that have nothing to do with fishing, and then 2 more that stay with the fishing tackle. And there's 2 lenses involved there. And the reason I have 2 pairs, one is the Green Mirror 580 glass lens, which is my favorite lens of all and gets all the use anytime it's sunny out because it increases contrasts in browns and greens. Excellent for seeing submerged weeds, submerged stuff in the water, picking fish out on the bottom, things like that on sunny days. And then I carry the Sunrise Silver, which is for the overcast days. Same base in the lens, just not quite as much overall darkness or tint to it, and does a great job with fish. So that's it. That's all I carry with my spinning tackle setup, and I can do basically whatever I need. And again, it fits all in one Plano 3700 box. So for this year, one compartment of that box now has flies in it. And so what flies am I carrying? And we'll work our way down to the fly rod. My flies, synthetic Clouser minnows. They're not tied with bucktail, which is traditional. That's how Bob Clouser originally tied them, with bucktail. But bucktail is very buoyant and it floats like crazy because it's hollow, and therefore, excuse me, to make that fly more reactive, I have to add more weight, which makes it harder to cast. So I prefer them tied with synthetic material and very sparse, and then I don't have to have as much weight to make that fly be responsive. And I'm of the opinion that a Clouser minnow is one of the most versatile flies of all time. So there's 3 of those in the box in 3 different sizes, and they are all green over white. And the reason they're green over white is because, in my opinion, that's a fantastic all-around natural color. I mean, name a whole slew of fish that are green on the top and white on the bottom, and big fish eat little fish. So hey, let's go with that. That's what I do. And so I carry those. I also carry a couple of woolly buggers, again, for just this extreme universalness of the woolly bugger. I carry 3 old school hare's ear nymphs, and they are on the small end of the spectrum. And then I carry like 4 or 5 partridge soft tackles. Again, very old school flies, but they're so versatile. I can take scissors and I can snip them down, or take my pocket knife and I can trim some of that hackle down if I need to, or I can leave them full size. I can put one of my tiny split shot ahead of it and work it deeper if I need to. Whatever the case might be, but those little soft tackle flies stay in there all the time. And to be honest with you, that's the first thing I grab. And they're going to range anywhere from a 16 up to a 12. And then from there, I'll carry a couple of very universal dry flies. My favorite of those, probably the old school, again, I'm so old school with fly fishing stuff, is the humpy. And I like the humpy because it floats like a cork. And then I'll carry a generic ant. And so all of those flies, there's probably 12.5 total flies in there. and they all fit in one little compartment in that Plano 3700 box. And then my leader, I carry a 9-foot leader that stays on the rod, and that tapers down to 3X. And then from there, I'll carry 4X and 6X tippet, or depending on the scenario, I might taper down to 2X, and then I will again carry the 5X and the 3X tippet. But at the end of the day, it's not a full leader system. I don't carry all my stuff. Again, it's all about keeping it simple and being in the ballpark. And when it's calm out and there's fish high in the water column, then hey, let's get after them with the fly rod because it's really fun. And so I carry a 6-weight, and it is 9 foot, 4-piece, and it's a Gray's brand rod. And the reason that I carry that 6-weight, it's heavy enough to deal with some light duty bassing, but it's not stupidly heavy to deal with trout or panfish. So I could have probably gone anywhere between a 5 and a 7. I just felt like the 6 was a good all around, and so that's what I carry. And it's got a little Gray's 6-weight reel on it. It's got a weight forward floating fly line on it, and the tippet material is the leader materials are monofilament. They're not fluorocarbon, so that I can fish high in the column if I need, and then I can use a split shot to point load the tippet and pull a fly down if I need. So that's all I'm carrying, guys. When I did add the fly rod to this scenario, then I also added a pair of forceps with built-in scissors, because those little tiny flies can be hard to get a hold of with the 7-inch Berkeley pliers. So now, the way I'm set up now, after I got done this morning putting all of that stuff together, I really honestly feel like I could go anywhere within about, 4 or 5 hours of my house and have a really, really good shot at catching fish. And over the years, I've added and taken things away from that box. The older I get, the more wise I get, the less stuff I feel like I need to carry in my truck, and I know what I'm going to gravitate to. And more often than not, it's going to go to how I work it or where I work it more than what I work, whether I'm in the truck or the boat or the kayak or the paddleboard. It's really more about where you put your lure and how you work it than it is the specific lure in most scenarios. So everything I've got is very universal in nature, and I can catch whatever. I debated this year, because it's so universal, I debated putting a net in the truck. And then I decided I wasn't going to put a net in the truck, because at the end of the day, if I lose a fish at the bank because I don't have a net and I'm trying to get a hold of them old school, that's okay with me. So I don't carry a net in the truck. I have historically carried a net in the truck. It also gets smelly if you're not good about rinsing it off, and so I don't anymore. So all of that stuff literally fits under the back seat of my Tundra. I went to Sportsman's and I bought a rod tube, and that rod tube allows the reels to stay attached on the rod. It's made to have 2-piece spinning rods with a spinning reel. Well, as I mentioned, the fly rod also fits in there with the 2-piece spinning rod. So all of it's in the same tube, and it fits under the back seat of the truck and then the Plano box. That's all there is to it. And so, of course, the Costas stay in my glove box, and there's always a towel in my truck, always. I'm a Labrador owner who spends a lot of time around water, so there's always a towel in my truck and a hand towel. So if you're a fan, you know I always have a hand towel tied to my side, because fishing is a dirty business, and it's almost, to me, like a security blanket to be able to reach down and rub my hand on that towel. And if you watch me fish, I do it subconsciously on the TV show all day long. I'll reach down and rub my hands on that towel without even looking at it. And if you've ever seen, I filmed one time and didn't have that towel with me and drove myself crazy. I kept looking down all day long. That's how I'm used to having that. And I recommend you do that as well, by the way. You'll keep your tackle cleaner, you'll keep your clothes cleaner, you'll keep your hands cleaner, and it's a really handy thing. So those things stay in my truck all the time anyway, and with all that stuff, I'm prepared to fish. So we'll see how it goes this year. I'm gonna spend a lot of time forcing myself to pull over and spend 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there, more than I have. And certain years I do a lot of that, certain years I do less of it. This year I'm gonna force the issue. Last year I really forced the issue on my bank fishing in general. It's a luxury to have a big fancy boat in the yard, and a small fancy boat for that matter, and other stuff at the same time that I can float on. But at the end of the day, I want to provide content that you guys can learn from, and not everybody has boats. So I forced myself to spend a lot of time on the bank last year. I've already done a ton of that this year, especially considering it's only the first week of March. And I'm going to do a lot of it through the summer season where we just pull over and fish for a little bit, and I feel like I'm prepared. So I might do a midsummer podcast on this about what I changed, what I learned, what I didn't. But I want to point out that this is based on about 20 years of having tackle in my truck right now, so it's pretty refined as it sits right now. And again, I think I could buy everything that I'm carrying for without the rod and the reel, all the lures and all that stuff. I could probably buy all that stuff for $75 at the most, and maybe $80. And then the rods and reels, it's up to you on how much you want to spend on it. So again, I don't bring the really high-end stuff in the truck. If it ever got stolen or if I leave it somewhere, I'm not as worried about it as I would be if it was, some really high-end stuff. So I recommend you guys put some tackle in your truck, be ready, but more importantly, have the mindset that I'm going to pull over and fish right here for a little bit. I'm driving by this river, I might as well, or this little state wildlife area, or this little city park pond, or whatever the case might be. A couple minutes out of your day doing some opportunity fishing is it's great for the soul, and it's good for your learning curve and your motivation and all of those things. So appreciate you guys listening to this episode of Fishful Thinker, the podcast. If you want to join the conversation, I'd really appreciate that. And that's at Fishful Thinker on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok, especially on the YouTube channel. If you'd subscribe while you're there, that would definitely help us out. We're trying to grow that thing. Eventually, TV is not going to be the thing anymore, and it's going to end up being YouTube or whatever the case might be. So we're trying to make sure that we're in that digital realm more than historically we have been, and we're at, I think, 600 videos on that YouTube channel, all of them education-based. So check that out. We'd appreciate that. Thanks for listening. This has been Fishful Thinker, the podcast.